Okay. It's always a pleasure each year to talk about the Jewish International Film Festival, which has expanded across Australia from October 27th until 22nd of December. And it's always a pleasure to talk to the artistic director of the Jewish International Film Festival, Eddie Tamir. Eddie, welcome to Movie Metropolis, as always.
Thanks for having me on, Peter, and excited to talk film.
Absolutely, and there's, I gather, no shortage of Jewish-themed and Jewish stories that you find around the world to program in JIFF.
Yeah, we always worry year to year whether there's going to be enough films of quality to put it together a festival. And we've been going quite a few years now, and luckily, um, there are many, many stories, and we watch, probably a couple of hundred films a year to get down to our 50, 60 film selection. So, yeah, we're very fortunate that there is so much Jewish storytelling going on around the world.
Excellent to hear. And of course, you work with your wife, Lindy, and
Yes,
it's very much a strong partnership there. So well done on
absolutely.
that. Yeah. Now, the opening night film stars and is directed by Jesse Eisenberg, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few years ago at the Munich Film Festival, a film called A Real Pain.
Yep, yep. So, again, we're very fortunate to be able to premiere this film in Australia. It's since its screening in Sundance and being picked up by Fox Searchlight / Disney, um, it's really become the darling of the festival circuit. It's going to be released on Boxing Day, and is really in the Oscar conversation for best screenplay, best film, etc., etc. So really something special. And Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin play two Jewish cousins, bit of a yin and yang sort of buddy road movie vibe between them. And they head to Poland on a roots tour to see where their Jewish grandmother was born and lived till um, till the war.
Okay. Sounds really interesting, and Eisenberg is such a major player in the film world, so that's excellent to see.
Yeah, it's the
Now,
first time that he's written, directed, and acted.
yeah,
Doing the Charlie Chaplin thing,
yes,
um, and he's clearly got a huge career ahead of him, being only 41 years old.
yes, absolutely. Now, a film I've already seen at the launch of JIFF is White Bird with Helen
Mm.
Mirren, and it's such a beautifully told story.
Yeah, and the feedback from the launch screening was unanimous. People really loved it, were moved, were uplifted. It's the sequel to the Wonder film, and it really is about positive messaging. So there's a grandson who's kind of losing his way uh, in school and become a bit of a bully, and in Jewish terms, not being a mensch, not being an upstanding kind of citizen of his school. And the grandmother, Helen Mirren, she basically takes him aside when she hears that he's gone in a direction that she is not happy about. And she then retells her childhood story of her survival during the Holocaust, and the amazing young man who was responsible for saving her, and their beautiful poetic romantic relationship that ensued. And the telling is beautiful, and really, I think the romance and the poetry in that young relationship really is very special. And we think it's going to satisfy a lot of people at JIFF.
Yes. And again, that film won't be released until end of the year, I think.
Next year.
Next year. Ah, okay.
Yes.
So people can see it during JIFF, which is excellent.
Mhm.
Can I just ask you, you've expanded JIFF to most states now, which is fantastic. That's a great opportunity for people around Australia to see your films.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, we're very excited about that, and we have requests from different cinemas in different states to play the festival. Obviously, it is a Jewish film festival, so there's obviously a local, Jewish core audience to it. But because, as we're discussing now, we're bringing really high quality Australian premiere films that would satisfy most cinephiles, and a general, quality cinema going audience. So there is demand outside the core Jewish audience into the general audience, which is really great to see.
Yes, absolutely. And people just go to the JIFF website for more details, which is terrific. Okay, jiff.com.au, just to let people know. Now, every year you feature a Yiddish film or some perspective on Yiddish. And this year you have an excellent documentary by Ros Horan called Welcome to Yiddish Land, which is so well researched. What a great film that is.
Yeah, and it's particularly Australian, and arguably particularly Melbourne. So it's an international story. And so Yiddish is the language that was spoken in pre-war Eastern Europe, in the Jewish communities of all the shtetls and the villages and across Eastern Europe. And obviously after the Second World War, that language was seen to have died, along with many of the people who were murdered who used to speak that language. And so today, there is a revival of that language and that culture that's, the general audience would be familiar with in terms of Yentl and Fiddler on the Roof, and all of that beautiful stuff comes out of Yiddish culture, which is appreciated around the world. So Welcome to Yiddish Land is about the revival of Yiddish language and culture around the world. And because Melbourne and Sydney have such an engaged Jewish population that has spoken Yiddish and does still speak Yiddish, many of the proponents of the World Yiddish Revival are from Melbourne and Sydney. And so we have some interesting characters, some very high-profile people like Barry Kosky, who is a real proponent of Yiddish and Yiddish culture, and is actually now leading one of the leading opera companies in Germany, and many, many other very interesting, talented people around the world.
Yes, great stuff. Now, a few years ago, I remember seeing a film called A German Life, which is all about Brunhilde Pomsel, who was the secretary to Goebbels. And I think Maggie Smith has starred in the remake, which I think she completed before she died. But you've got what sounds like a great documentary, Führer and Seducer, all about Goebbels.
Yep. Well, it's actually a feature film, not a
Ah,
documentary,
ah,
which makes it even more interesting, because when you start dealing with the Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, and you don't just leave the documentary and you actually create a feature film, then there's a lot of controversy about how they're depicted, and are they being humanized in an inappropriate way, et cetera, et cetera. So this film premiered at the Munich Film Festival recently and is now on release in Germany. And it really is about the master of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, and how his insidious approach to fake news, propaganda, film, production, for the sake of really disgusting ends, really is almost a template and resonates today with the explosion of, fake news and propaganda. And so the filmmaker is trying to resonate with today, but very focused on Joseph Goebbels, his career as a propagandist, and all that archival footage that we're all familiar with about that era in history. It goes behind that footage to Joseph Goebbels in time and how he created that footage. So you'll go to the archival footage, and then you'll go into the feature film storytelling of Goebbels at the time and how he created the footage that we see as just acceptable truth, but we actually go behind the scenes to see how it's an absolute sham and a concoction to create propaganda.
Yes, yes. Oh, it sounds terrific. Looking forward to seeing that. Now, speaking, you mentioned the Munich Film Festival. I met Michel Hazanavicius a few years ago when I was at Munich, and he's done an animation called The Most Precious of Cargoes.
Yep, which just premiered in official selection in Cannes this year. And a very beautiful, powerful film, as you would expect from him. And it follows a Polish peasant couple who are childless, and they live near the train line. And at one train on its way to the Auschwitz concentration camp passes by close to their village, and a child is thrown from the train, a baby. And it's all about what happens with that couple and that baby, and very powerful. And the fact that it's done in animation creates such unusual spaces to explore the topic that has obviously been covered in many angles, but it definitely brings a fresh dramatic way to consider that period.
Okay. Again, sounds really interesting. Now, I notice you've got a couple of TV series, and one that drew my attention is Kafka.
Yeah. Wow. This is really something that I personally love. This We're obviously in the period of Kafka right now, because it's 120 years anniversary since his passing. 100 years. And this is an Austrian production of the highest quality, and it's a 6-part series, which actually goes over 4 hours, and we're offering it as a binge watch in 2 parts at JIFF. And so Kafka's, the cliches about Kafka is he's depressing and it's dark and if you want to get depressed, then read Kafka. But he was a entertaining, witty, cheeky character, and it goes into his life and his life journey. And what it does in an incredible way, which I've probably never seen done so elegantly, it tells the story of his life, and then it'll take excursions into his creative process, leading into some of the greatest books of all time. And so you'll segue from just moments in his life to something that might then trigger an inspiration. And then you'll go into surrealist imagery from his books as he's imagining them and writing them. Very, very special and highly recommended.
Oh, very much looking forward to it. Now, I'm always surprised each year with some documentaries. For example, I didn't know that Janis Ian was Jewish.
Yeah. Yep. So I don't know about for you, but for me, her music, and I'm not sure that I even knew myself until I saw the film. So that album, Between the Lines, was something that I listened to with all my friends when we were in high school, and it really was part of my musical upbringing, and I love that album, so the film is not just nostalgic for me; it's just so well done. It's got her very earliest performances and just shows what an incredible talent she was. And it was thrilling to see the early performances and then the concert performances and then the personal story that she ultimately it comes out as a gay woman, and the film tracks that as well in a very interesting, nuanced way. And she's still alive today and still performing, even though her vocal cords she has some problems with them at the moment. But incredible character, and yes, has a very specific Jewish grounding and background that the film also brings out.
Wow, how very, very interesting. And I noticed, speaking of documentaries, there's one on Norman Mailer and one on Diane Warren, who was Oscar nominated for so many of her songs.
Yeah, so Diane Warren is like one of those unsung stories of people that have, huge impact on the world, but no one really, she's not a household name. And that's mainly because she's not a performer, but she's a very eccentric and very creative and talented songwriter. And in fact, on some lists, you'll find when you go to the greatest songwriter list of all time, the top 10, she will appear in amongst McCartney and Lennon and Dylan, et cetera, et cetera, and the only female in that list. So she has had 16 Oscar soundtrack nominations for soundtracks that she's written. She's written songs for Cher and Beyonce and some of the greatest other performers that are household names. And yes, she's Jewish, and she, has a big connection to her Jewish identity, and it's just a fascinating portrayal of impressive woman. And then Norman Mailer, who is obviously very well known and is a household name, and the film is great. It really does a great job and gets into his kind of brawling, fisticuff kind of, nature, as well as his intellectual fisticuffs. He takes on, he has big debates with the feminists of the day, and he's just a fascinating thinker and really mind-opening. And it's a very well done documentary.
Great stuff. So many highlights in the festival. And I noticed a film directed by Michael Winterbottom called Shoshana.
Yep. So Michael Winterbottom of the Trip series fame directs Shoshana, and he takes us to British Mandate Palestine in the years before the establishment of the State of Israel. And it's obviously a very complex time that has lots of resonance all the way till today, obviously. And it's about a Jewish woman called Shoshana Borchov, whose father was a big character in Jewish history, and she has a love affair with a British policeman from the British Mandate, and that is obviously very complicated at that time, because between the Arab community, the Jewish community, and the British community, there's lots of tensions, and the film brings out all the complexity of the time in a very compelling way.
Uh-huh. Interesting stuff. And I noticed a documentary called The Commandant's Shadow about Rudolf Höss, which of course connects this back to Zone of Interest.
Yep. So it is arguably a companion piece to Zone of Interest. So it's actually not about Rudolf Höss, but it's about Rudolf Höss's son. So Rudolf Höss's son and also his daughter, one of the daughters and one of the sons. It tracks I guess, their perspective today on their family history and their family legacy and what they feel today about the fact that their father was the commandant of the most notorious death camp in history. And so it does that in a very complex way and a very sensitive way. And it takes Rudolf Hess's son into a conversation and a meeting with an Auschwitz survivor today. So the back wall of his house was the front wall of the Auschwitz concentration camp. And this survivor was behind that wall and he was in front of that wall. So the way that it sensitively brings them together and offers a really interesting perspective on the way potentially we can reconcile as human beings and move forward is fascinating.
Yes, yes. Again, sounds good. Now, I'm so glad there's a documentary about the dreadful Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, a film called 6:30.
Yep. So there's a lot of film and television being created about October 7. This one is notable. It covers 4 stories of the day, October 7. And what it does is it uses miniatures. So there's miniature models of the 4 scenarios that are described by the survivors. So you have a kibbutz scenario and you have the Nova dance party scenario and you have a couple of other scenarios. And what those miniature models do as you hear the testimony of the survivors, it takes you into those spaces without, I guess, giving you the space without being confronted by stark and horrific footage, but actually letting the testimonies breathe and open up into and use your own imagination while you're visualizing these miniature models of the day.
Right. Again, fascinating stuff. And nice contrast is a comedy, which sounds really quite amusing, Between the Temples.
Yep. Great film. Just unanimously good reviews. Just released in America right now. Premiered at the Berlin Film Festival this year, starring Jason Schwartzman and Carol Kane. And for those listeners who don't recall Carol Kane, she's one of the great actresses and starred in that great TV series Taxi. And so the director, Nathan Silver, is channeling, I think, openly the whole Harold and Maude tradition of film and storytelling. And Jason Schwartzman plays a young 40-something cantor at a synagogue whose wife dies. He goes into a depression. He can't sing anymore. He loses his voice. Carol Kane is this very quirky 70-something who comes to the synagogue and says she wants to conduct the ritual of a bat mitzvah, which is what a young 12-year-old Jewish woman does as a rites of passage, and she's never done it. And so she comes to Jason Schwartzman's character with this request, and he's being matched, with a rabbi's daughter and going on, through all the circuit of the obvious things, and he can't really connect to any of the obvious things on offer in the society that he's in. But he and Carol Kane's character, they struck up this amazing, interesting, beautiful relationship, which is quite challenging, quirky, and it goes through all the family dysfunction, within all the different families and how they cope with such a scenario of this really beautiful connection between these 2 unlikely people.
Again, sounds great. And I just want to draw attention to the closing night film, which stars Jeremy Piven, called The Performance.
So yeah, really great. We're ending the festival with a bang and a tap dance. So it's actually directed by Jeremy Piven's sister, Shira Piven. And it's the performance is based on an Arthur Miller short story. And it's about an almost washed up tap dancer in America who still has, ideas of glory. And he's recruited by some promoter to tour Europe just before the Second World War and into the Second World War, and ends up in a most peculiar scenario where he's performing. He and his troupe, half of which are Jewish, performing for the Nazi brass. And he's paid to do that, which comes with all the challenges and complexities and dangers, and some amazing tap dancing.
Okay. Look, we can't cover every film in JIFF this year. That gives you a taste. However, Eddie, are there any other films that you want to draw attention to that we haven't talked about so far?
Yeah, I'll mention two quickly.
Yep.
The first one is Tatami, which premiered in Venice last year. And it's the first film to ever be directed by an Israeli director and an Iranian director, co-directing the film. And the scenario is focused on a female judo Iranian champion fighter who competes in the world championships. And as she's advancing through the rounds, she's likely to meet her Israeli friend and competitor, and the Iranian government decide to put pressure on her to pull out of the competition for political reasons, and she's faced with a dilemma. And it's an incredibly powerful drama, very resonant with contemporary politics, to say the least, and highly recommended. The last film I mentioned, which is not in the printed program, which is a late announce, which perhaps you haven't been updated on, and it is a film that is one of the sensations of the year and is definitely in the Best Picture conversation, and it's called The Brutalist. And it premiered in Toronto, starring Adrian Brody. It's a 3-hour masterpiece, and it is about a Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivor who comes to America and becomes a brutalist architect. And it's about his relationship with a particular property developer and real estate developer, and is a must-see. And we only have one screening in Sydney on December 1 and one screening in Melbourne December 8. And these are advanced special presentations.
Excellent stuff. So many highlights and more in this year's Jewish International Film Festival. Just go to jiff.com.au. And as always, it's a pleasure to talk to Eddie Tamir, who's the artistic director of JIFF across Australia this year. Eddie, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks, Peter, and see you and all your listeners at the movies.
Absolutely. All the best. Bye-bye.